diamonds. I like stunning, I like shining, I like $1,000,000 deals.
For our Freshman Ventures project, we took our talents to South Beach in order to find out what should we remember about the Cuban exodus to Miami and its effects on America. We traveled to Florida International University to interview Associate Director of the Cuban Research Institute, Sebastian Arcos, and Dean of the Honors College, Juan Carlos Espinosa. We asked Professor Arcos why Cubans left Cuba for America.
So Cuba, in the late 1960s, had become one of the most orthodox communist countries in the world. I was growing up in that Cuba. All that came after Fidel Castro consolidated his own personal power, after he made clear in the late 1959, early 1960s, that his fight was against the United States. That's what prompted the Cuban exodus.
As Dr. Espinosa explains, there wasn't just one wave of Cuban immigrants.
There were several waves of Cuban refugees, migrations. Each wave brought a different set of characteristics, values. In the first two waves, they bring their professions, their experience, their networks with each other, and their own reputations. When they got here, businessmen could not get loans from American banks because they had no collateral, or who are these people? So a number of people got together and pooled their money, and they loaned money to other people based on their reputation alone. That was their collateral, right? And so you have the creation of these networks of people, almost alternative institutions.
Regardless of which wave of immigration a Cuban refugee was a part of, they were all trying to escape the same thing: persecution and brutality.
And that's when they started the imprisoning people for their political views and their religious practice. So there were thousands and tens of thousands of political prisoners. So people fled the repression and the violence of the regime, and that has been pretty much a constant.
For Arcos, however, his experience with the Castro regime was firsthand.
For my family, they were too involved with the Castro government very early on, and there was a prohibition for people who were part of the government to leave the island. So they were stuck there. When I graduated from high school in 1979, I was asking uncomfortable questions, you may say.
The turning point for Arcos was witnessing the 1980 event at the Peruvian embassy in Havana, where over 10,000 Cubans crammed into the embassy's walls in order to leave the country.
For me, simply unacceptable. The government created these bands, these mobs of people who attack the homes of people who wanted to leave. It was Kristallnacht in Havana. It was pure fascism. And I was 19 years old at the time. For me, it was devastating. It's a regime that I cannot accept, that I cannot follow, that I cannot tolerate. The following year, we were captured by the secret police trying to leave the country illegally. My uncle, my father, and I were sent to prison. I was in prison for a year.
While in prison, Professor Arcos and his family worked with an international organization to expose the human rights violations in Cuba.
We met with this group. A 400-page report from this group was published the following year. It was devastating for the Cuban government. The Cuban government reacted by sending mobs to my house. My house was vandalized. Signs were painted on the walls on the outside with themes from the Cuban Revolution in red paint. It looked like dripping blood. I finally left Cuba in 1992, came to Miami, and became involved in the human rights struggle from this side.
Dr. Espinosa, on the other hand, came to the U.S. at a much younger age.
I was 6 years old when I came to the United States. My father had been a political prisoner. And when he came out of prison, thanks to his brother who was in the government, he arranged for us to go to Mexico.
From there, Dr. Espinosa and his family came to the U.S.
Coming to this country, my father spoke English. My mom didn't speak any English. I became the translator for the family because my father was always working. I very quickly learned the importance of making connections and serving as a bridge between people, not just my mom and my third grade school teacher, but between communities.
The transition to a new country, however, was not always an easy one.
I learned to speak English quickly. My first year in the United States, I got beat up every day for not speaking English and chased home. I became really fast and really tough, and I started winning some fights after a while. But in the meantime, my English kept on improving, and that interest in connecting people and interested in cultures and how you can translate from one culture, one language to another has always been fascinating for me.
When we asked Professor Arcos what should we remember about the Cuban exodus, his response was a foreboding one.
That's an important question that is not always easy to answer. And I'm going to try to connect it with something that is going on right now in the United States and that worries me as a Cuban American very much. We should always remember that you cannot rely on one individual as the savior of your nation. Institutions are far more important than an individual. And number two, not less important than that, good intentions do not make for good politics.
Professor Arcos warned that those good intentions in politics often take the form of a call for socialist policies in the United States.
So we hear people talking about socialism in the United States because they believe that is the best way to increase the standard of living in the United States, to be generous toward those who are poor and who are being left behind by the system. And we cannot forget that everywhere that socialism has been implemented, across races, religions, cultures, and time, it has resulted in a complete economic catastrophe that not only doesn't help those who are left behind, but destroys the base of the economy. Socialism is a pest, and it should be treated as a pest.
Dr. Espinosa, on the other hand, had a different response to the question that highlighted the variations of opinions and values Cubans brought to America.
I mentioned the different waves, and each wave of Cubans arrives with a different socialization or a different experience of growing up in communist Cuba. So they have different approaches to education, to how you make a living, to engage in community. It's that diversity that's based on socialization and when you arrived, what generation you are, and then that feeds into, your political views, your values, and more. The stereotype of Cubans is that they're all monolithically right-wing Republicans, and no, we're diverse. You can find pretty much everything.
After conducting all these interviews and learning so much new information about Cuban immigration to Miami, we asked Dr. Espinosa why the Cuban American story is often overlooked.
In general, we Americans, and I'm an American by choice, are not that interested in the rest of the world. Go to someone, say in Jackson, Mississippi. Here's a map. Can you point out Iraq? Can you point out Afghanistan? Damn, we've been in Afghanistan for 18 years, and they don't know where it is. So yeah, it hasn't been important. It's important in South Florida. That's about it.
The lessons learned through the Cuban exodus are things we as all people should keep in mind moving forward. The Cubans left their home country in order to escape persecution and poverty, and brought with them their culture, traditions, and values to the United States. Their crisis was one that is being echoed today in places such as Syria, Venezuela, and Central America. It is crucial that we apply what has been learned through Cuban immigration to today's world. That way, we as one species, one community, one global village can come together, help one another, and prevent the mistakes of the past from being the disasters of the future.
The difference is only in terms of that definition: migrant, refugee, illegal, what have you. But what we have in common is we were trying to find a better life for ourselves and for our children, so that they would not have to grow up in the conditions that they were in.